The story of the Vikings, venturing into North America around the year 1000 AD, conjures images of hardy explorers and fierce warriors facing the unknown. These Norse seafarers, already legendary for their raids across Europe, ventured further westward than most could have dreamed, reaching what they called Vinland, a land rich in natural resources and unlike their northern homeland. Yet, these first Europeans to set foot in North America were not alone. They encountered the land's indigenous inhabitants, groups skilled in survival, adapted to the land, and unaccustomed to foreign faces. Though brief and sparsely documented, the encounters between Vikings and Native Americans marked the very first contact between Europeans and the peoples of North America, occurring nearly 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus. Most of what we know comes from sagas, medieval Norse stories blending history with myth. But what exactly happened when Vikings met Native Americans? What evidence remains of the battles hinted at in ancient tales? This is the tale of first contact, of possible alliances, brutal conflicts, and an intriguing but short-lived chapter in the saga of exploration. The Viking Age, stretching from the late 8th century to the early 11th century, was marked by Norse expansion, exploration, and often violent conquest. The Norse people, originating from present-day Scandinavia, navigated treacherous seas, discovering lands previously unknown to Europeans. Driven by a mixture of survival needs, adventure, and ambition, they pushed westward, first to Iceland and then to Greenland. In Greenland, Eric the Red, an infamous Viking exile, established a settlement. His son, Leif Erikson, inspired by tales from a sailor who had glimpsed a mysterious land to the west, embarked on an expedition. According to Norse sagas, Erikson and his crew landed on the shores of North America around the year 1000. They named the area Vinland, likely for the wild grapes they found growing there, or possibly because of its abundant resources, which stood in stark contrast to the harsh landscape of Greenland. The Vikings' settlement efforts in Vinland were both ambitious and short-lived. Archaeological evidence suggests they may have set up a temporary outpost at L'Anse Meadows in modern-day Newfoundland, Canada. This site, with its remnants of Norse-style buildings, iron tools, and other artifacts, represents the clearest proof of Viking presence in North America. However, the sagas tell us that Vinland was not the empty frontier the Norse had hoped for, and their arrival marked the beginning of tense encounters with the indigenous people they called Skraelings. At the time of Viking exploration, North America was home to diverse and thriving societies. The Norse settlers would likely have encountered groups related to the ancestors of the Innu, Beothuk, and other Native American groups along the northeastern seaboard. These indigenous societies had rich cultural practices, advanced survival techniques adapted to their environment, and a deep understanding of the land. The exact identity of the people the Norse encountered remains uncertain, as the term Skraeling, used in the sagas, could refer to any indigenous group that did not resemble the Norse themselves. The Skraelings were perceived as both formidable and unfamiliar, using weaponry, tactics, and technologies unlike those of the Norse. Native groups in the region were well acquainted with their own forms of warfare, hunting, and survival, and they were skilled navigators of both land and sea, capable of swift adaptation to the Viking presence. The first encounters between the Norse and the Skraelings were recorded in the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red, both written down centuries after the events they describe. These sagas portray the Skraelings as curious and cautious, approaching the Norse settlements to trade and observe. In one account, the Vikings initially traded with the Skraelings, exchanging textiles and milk products for pelts and furs, commodities the Norse could use in Greenland and Iceland's cold climates. Despite these peaceful exchanges, tension simmered beneath the surface. One story recounts how a Viking bull, unfamiliar and frightening to the Skraelings, caused panic, ultimately straining relations. As the sagas describe it, the Norse grew wary, feeling increasingly vulnerable to the larger population of native people surrounding them. Whether due to cultural misunderstandings or sheer competition for resources, what began as tentative contact quickly escalated into outright hostility. The sagas are punctuated with vivid descriptions of confrontations. In one famous account, a large group of Skrælings approached the Viking settlement in Vinland. A fierce battle ensued, with both sides suffering casualties. According to the saga of the Greenlanders, the Vikings were overwhelmed by the Skrælings, who used slings to hurl stones and arrows to deadly effect. The Norse, unfamiliar with the Skrælings' fighting style and possibly outnumbered, decided to retreat. Archaeologically, evidence of these battles is limited. Sites like Lance o' Meadows provide insights into Norse life in Vinland, but show few signs of warfare. This has led historians to wonder if the clashes described in the sagas were exaggerated or if the Norse quickly learned to avoid conflicts with the natives. One possible interpretation is that the battles were not sustained, but instead consisted of sporadic skirmishes that underscored the fragility of Norse settlements in North America. The sagas are written with a flair for drama, blending myth with reality, making it difficult to discern historical fact from storytelling. However, one fact is clear. The Vikings, accustomed to raiding and warfare, found themselves outmatched in an unfamiliar land. They likely recognized that the Skrælings, though smaller in stature and perhaps less heavily armed, knew the land far better. The Vikings' metal weapons, while advanced, may have been less effective in close-quarters skirmishes against the swift and mobile native fighters. Ultimately, these clashes and the Vikings' inability to secure a foothold in Vinland speak volumes about the resilience and adaptability of the indigenous societies they encountered. While the Norse presence in North America was short-lived, the encounters with Native Americans left a lasting impression on Norse oral tradition. The tales of Vinland were passed down for generations, emphasizing the distance and strangeness of the land and its people. To the Norse, the Skrælings were a reminder of the world beyond their own, one where even Viking strength could not guarantee survival. For Native American societies, the Norse visit may have been but a brief interruption. There is little evidence to suggest that these early encounters had any long-term cultural impact on indigenous peoples. However, it is possible that memories of these strange visitors lingered in the oral histories of local tribes, adding a chapter to their own storied pasts. The Norse ultimately abandoned Vinland, and several factors likely influenced this decision. The hostile relationship with the Skrælings, who fiercely defended their territory, was a significant deterrent. Vinland, though resource-rich, was isolated from the main Norse settlements in Greenland and Iceland, making regular resupply difficult. Furthermore, the Norse faced environmental challenges: harsh winters, unpredictable weather, and difficulties in cultivating crops. The sagas tell of the Vikings' struggle to find their place in Vinland. Though they were skilled sailors and experienced fighters, they faced a society adapted to North American life in ways the Norse were not. Recognizing that they were not only outnumbered, but also outmatched in resilience and resourcefulness, the Vikings chose to leave Vinland. Instead, they focused on sustaining their settlements in Greenland, where they could maintain stronger cultural and trade ties with the rest of the Norse world. While the Norse expeditions to Vinland were brief, their significance is far-reaching. These were the first documented encounters between Europeans and Native Americans, predating Columbus by nearly 500 years. Unlike later European explorers, the Vikings did not aim to colonize or convert the native population. They were driven by a mixture of curiosity and survival. This first contact illustrates the Norse spirit of exploration and hints at the complexities of cross-cultural encounters. The Viking voyages to North America mark an early chapter in the age of exploration, revealing that European knowledge of the wider world extended further than often assumed. This encounter also serves as a fascinating comparison to later European colonization efforts, which would have much more lasting and often devastating effects on Native American societies. The Norse, despite their fierce reputation, showed a level of respect for the Skrælings by ultimately withdrawing from their land rather than forcing their presence upon it. The Viking saga in North America, though short, remains a tale of courage, curiosity, and cultural clash. The Norse explorers, driven to the edge of their known world, found themselves in a land as formidable as its inhabitants. The Native Americans they encountered were resilient, resourceful, and unyielding, and they succeeded in defending their land from these foreign visitors. While the evidence for Viking battles with Native Americans may be scant, the stories in the Norse sagas capture the essence of first contact between two worlds. This encounter, though ephemeral, foreshadowed the interactions that would come centuries later when Europe turned its attention once more to the lands across the Atlantic. It is a reminder of how the paths of history often cross in unexpected ways, leaving behind mysteries and stories that continue to intrigue and inspire. Today, the ruins at Lanson Meadows stand as a testament to this chapter in human history, a place where two worlds met, clashed, and left their mark on each other in ways we are only beginning to understand. The saga of the Vikings and the Skraelings remains an enduring story of exploration, discovery, and the timeless drive to know what lies beyond the horizon.